it does actually come down to kind of a binary choice. Do you want to have someone that you need to constantly push? Or do you want to have someone that you have to reel back in? And I tell people all the time, you want people that you have to reel back in, because teaching someone how to find a throttle is much different to teaching someone to try to build a gas pedal.
Caring for others and leading in life and death circumstances is what is expected from every adventure guide, especially mountaineers like Luis Benitez. Not only do you have to manage your own internal chatter and noise, but you've got to do it with and for your teammates, most of whom have less than ideal physical conditioning and perhaps less mental resolve. Not only has Luis made it to the top of his guiding career, having led the first blind climber to the summit of Everest, but also as he's reinvented his career as an outdoor recreation expert for Colorado and nationally, and become an author, having recently published a terrific must-read book called Higher Ground: How the Outdoor Recreation Industry Can Save the World. Audacious title, and yes, his evidence is compelling. In today's podcast, we'll talk about what it's like to stand on top of the world, what he had to do, and the costs involved with getting there, what leading an expedition and leading in business have to do with each other, and what world-class teaming looks like in today's world. It's an excitement-rich conversation, so clip in and let's step wise together with Luis. What's it like to stand on top of the world 6 times? What's that experience like?
It's everything you think it would be, Foster. And it's a fleeting moment that you've worked really, really hard to achieve. You try to appreciate it while you're in the moment, but your mind's already shifting to the work required for turning around and going back down.
Let's talk about that for a second. You know, you were the first Everest climber to guide a non-sighted person to the top. Talk to us about the preparation required for you physically and mentally, as well as for Erik.
Yeah, you're referencing Erik Weihenmayer, who's indeed an amazing individual, a great friend. It was an all Colorado team that if you really looked through the lens of climbing experience at that point, we were all untested. There was only a few people on the team that had been to Everest before and that had summited. The thing for us, especially in the face of a lot of detractors in the global media saying that what we were doing was a stunt, there's no possible way that you could do this safely. You know, the conversations around what that is or what it would mean were really fractured. It was just an incredible thing to be a part of, because I think when you start talking about breaking barriers and proving to other people what's possible, the thing that really stood out for all of us was that there is no roadmap here. We're creating it as we go along. And I think the willingness to do that requires a couple of pieces to make it special. And the thing I think we all got fortunate on was that our team had that makeup.
Well, what convinced you that it was possible in the first place? I mean, it's a pretty audacious thing.
Yeah, I think the thing that convinced me was just knowing Erik personally and seeing him as a climber. At that point, he had climbed Denali in Alaska. He had climbed Kilimanjaro, which isn't all that technical, but still high. He was a climber by hobby, rock climbing, ice climbing. And I think the thing that made me think it was possible was that he and Pasquale Scorturo, our expedition leader, built a team. There's sort of that blend whenever you're starting out your career of how much experience do I have and what's the willingness threshold that I hold. And there was nobody on that team who metaphorically wasn't willing to wash the windows and do the floors. Whatever was required, we were there. And I think all of us training at a really high level with the National Federation of the Blind to understand access issues and policy issues in the United States for mobility issues, along with leveraging some of that training and some of that education towards working with Erik, we really leaned in on everything together. And so each one of us somewhat became an all-terrain vehicle, knowing that if somebody got sick, couldn't make it, needed to step in, we had help.
As I recall it, there's an interesting story about how you got on that team. Would you be willing to share that?
Yeah, well, people think, well, what do you do? How does that work? Is there an application? Do people, sort of look at your CV? And for me, it was all based on relationships. So I had started climbing in the Himalayas a couple of years before this trip, and we were trying for a first American ascent on a route in the Annapurna region,
Hmm.
on this mountain called Gangapurna. And I had a Sherpa climbing with me, Pasang Tenzing, and Pasang at the end of the trip, before I came back to Colorado, said, "Hey, I've climbed with somebody from Denver, from your town. Would you mind carrying a gift back from me for him?" Didn't think anything of it. Took this nice little box, brought it home. He gave me, who at the time turned out to be Pasquale Scarturo, the expedition leader's phone number. Got back to Denver, called him. And at the time, professionally, I was really trying to find a way and a path to get to Everest. And, met PV, met Pasquale for lunch, sat down. He said, "Oh, how was Gangapurna? That sounds like a big trip." Just started talking. The climbing community at that level is pretty small. At the time, I was pretty young. So, really looked up to Pasquale and everything that he had done. And I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, I'm putting together an Everest expedition with the first blind person to ever attempt it." And there was no invite. It was just, "This is what I'm doing." And I made a decision then and there that I verbalized. I said, "Pasquale, I'm about to become your new best friend. I'll be calling you once a week to see what I can do to be a part of this. I'll help you buy gear. I'll help you pack. I'll help you lead a trek to base camp, whatever it is. I think this is really important and I want to be a part of it."
That's fantastic. Great story. Persistence, determination. You got the vision early on.
Yeah, yeah, and I think, for me too, and I think this is an important part, when people talk about their leadership origin story and what their purpose springs from. I had really debilitating asthma and allergies when I was a little kid. Couldn't really go outside much until I started to outgrow it. The mountains definitely helped me get my lungs strong and get my health back. And when I, first heard of Erik, I just had a very visceral memory of being a kid and being told what I could and couldn't do. And when Pasquale was telling me about, how the media was against it and saying that what they were going to do was silly, I had a very visceral reaction that nobody has a right to define the limits of someone else. And I wanted to be a part of breaking through that. So for me, it was deeply personal straight out of the gate.
That's fantastic. I haven't planned to ask you this, Luis, but I'd love you to weigh in on this piece. Leaders in today's corporate world are dealing with a workforce with greater agency than ever before. They know what they will do and they know what they won't do. And yet, a lot of leaders don't know how to handle someone like that who is absolutely determined to play at the top of his or her license. They want to constrain them, put them in boxes, hold them to a job description. What would you say? What kind of advice do you give leaders today if they had a young Luis who was absolutely determined to play at the top level?
Yeah, that's a great question. Oh, it's fun to reflect on that. Would I wish a 29-year-old Luis on anybody? And I think, when you're starting
Yeah,
out in your career in your late 20s and your early 30s, you do have this sense of thinking of limitless possibilities and
yeah,
potential. And I tell leaders all the time, it does actually come down to kind of a binary choice. Do you want to have someone that you need to constantly push? Or do you want to have someone that you have to reel back in? And I tell
it's a
people
great
all the time,
question. That's a great.
you want people that you have to reel back in, because teaching someone how to find a throttle is much different to teaching someone to try to build a gas pedal. One of the things that I try to encourage all leaders to do is recognize that if you see that in someone, especially the next generation, where they feel, yes, there's agency, but I think it's inherent. There's always a belief in that there's limitless potential in what's possible. You want that throttle because it's a much easier thing to advance and grow. And I think it also attaches to the conversation about ego. And we have that as mountaineers a lot. I say all the time, what are you holding on to versus what are you letting other people do? What are you taking control of? And for me, for Everest, at least with Erik, there was no one angling to summit with him. It was just a matter of who was in front and who was behind him out of all the guides. I just happened to be in that position on summit day. And I think it truly is one of those questions of, if you feel compelled towards a purpose, and how do you find a way to bring everybody along with you?
Yeah, I love that. And there's a question about teamwork I want to get back to, because it seems to me that climbing, especially high stakes climbing like that, is one of the best descriptions of teamwork that we could have. And so I'd love to explore that a little bit more. But I have kind of an origin story question too for the people that have not yet read this book. Luis's latest book is Higher Ground: How the Outdoor Recreation Industry Can Save the World. Highly recommended, available on Amazon. 5 stars, read it twice, really enjoyed it. How does a kid with asthma and allergies in St. Louis end up in the mountains? Can you describe that piece of the journey for us?
This is important, where you hold on to the magic of being a kid. And I think the older we get, as the roles and responsibilities get bigger, whether you're C-suite or not, I think oftentimes we lose a little bit of that sparkle, and maybe not lose it, but you might forget a little bit of that magic. And
Yep.
For me, I think it was the same question that any kid gets. Little boy, what do you want to do when you grow up? And being a sick little kid really turned me into a voracious reader. And my dad had a collection of National Geographic magazines. Fond memories of like pulling a stack of yellowback magazines with a bowl of cookies to my bedroom to just flip through the pages and read these articles. Because for me, having a hard time just going outside and playing, doing anything in any of these magazines was like going to the moon. And I came across an article about the first American expedition to Everest, and Jim Whittaker, who has recently passed, the first American to climb Everest. Turns out he also had really bad asthma and allergies when he was a kid. I remember being 10 years old and bringing this magazine into my parents' bedroom and saying, this guy has what I have. This is it. This is what I want to do. I want to be a mountain guide. I want to climb Mount Everest. This is what I want to do. For them, you pat your kid on the head, you say, oh, that's a lovely idea. And you go on about your way. And I think plans change. You go to school for different things. Do I make my hobby my career? Do I make my career my hobby? You have all these, intrinsic questions. But for me, here's where I got lucky. My father's from Ecuador. He comes from a very mountainous region and had brothers who were mechanical engineers by profession, but climbers by hobby. And my father's youngest brother, as we started spending summers down in Ecuador, would just take me up to the high alpine huts at the base of these glaciated peaks. And I got to interact with the community that I saw in that magazine article, where I was just close enough that I thought, gosh, I think these are the people I'm supposed to be with. And the interesting thing physiologically that happened, because I grew up with breathing problems, because I grew up understanding how to pressure breathe, I was noticing that the higher I got in altitude, as other people around me were really starting to feel nervous because they couldn't catch a full breath, I knew what it was like having a childhood filled with that. And so the higher I got, the calmer I got, while other people around me started to get a little nervous and a little jittery. So it was this significant light bulb moment that, wow. I think I actually have a mechanical advantage.
Wow. So summers in Ecuador, visiting the alpine peaks and huts, there's a step there between that and guiding others. What was that step for you?
We'll be right back.
This Stepwise episode is proudly sponsored by Mountain Mule. Our goal is to make sure your experience in Montana is unlike anything else. At Mountain Mule, we provide private chauffeur service and Yellowstone National Park tours. Whether you're traveling to or from Bozeman, have a private event, or want a once-in-a-lifetime tour experience, we'd love to get you there. Book at mountain-mule.com and use code STEPWISE.
Going into high school, other friends, you want to be a lifeguard at a pool and work at a pizza shop, part of the luck of being part of the family that I am. I just wanted to go down to Ecuador and to be a hut boy in the hut system and work in the high mountain huts, where you are the bottom of the totem pole, sweeping out the huts, cleaning the kitchen, helping to boil water for soup and tea. What I was exposed to at that point was all of these international guiding companies that would bring their clients to Ecuador as a training ground to go on and climb bigger peaks around the world. At a high school age, I was meeting CEOs of global guiding companies that would come down and see this kid who spoke perfect English, but also Spanish. And you're half Ecuadorian. I don't get it. You're from the Midwest, but you're here. You like climbing. So it was kind of this oddity to a lot of these individuals. But again, like most entry level jobs, when they'd invite me over to sit down for a cup of tea or a bowl of soup, I would, and I would listen. What's it like to run a global business? How do you become a guide with your company? What does it take? Because I spoke English fluently and knew those peaks intimately, as these companies needed assistant guides and needed to hire what they considered local talent. Because I was already there, I would get the opportunity to do so.
Let's talk about teamwork for a second. Am I right in assuming that climbing is an absolute team sport? And could you describe a little bit about, what all of us need to know about teamwork that could apply to a business team, for example?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think, and Foster, you and I have discussed this before. I think at its highest art form, it truly is the essence of teamwork. You have to place the ego aside. You have to have really sincere and effective communication. You have to all be pointed in the same direction at the same time, understand the risk portfolio, and the appetite for risk, so that's when everything's working well. I think where a lot of people get tripped up is, and you see this in guided climbs a lot, is you have a collection of individuals that are trying very quickly to become a team. Much like in business, as you start to develop deals or mergers, you have to find that sweet spot. For mountaineering, especially when you're guiding at that level, you have to take a group of high functioning type A individuals and quickly turn them into an effective team. The real magic behind that is a little bit of allowing the process to go experiential. If people think that they're alpha, they should lead, they've got the best idea for A, B, and C, leaving room for that experience to happen safely to where people start to naturally fall in the order of things. And what emerges is their skill sets. This person hates setting up tents. This person loves boiling water. That communication around who does what, why, where, when, and how, as opposed to I'm responsible for everything. You have to leave these moments for experiential development in any formation of a team. And I find that that's really hard when you're up against a clock, you're up against a distinct goal, like summiting a big mountain. But if you don't leave room for that, you impose these things on the people that you're with. Oftentimes I find that there's misalignment. And early on, I would hear it. I hated setting up tents. I much would have preferred to be in the kitchen. And reflecting on that, like, wow, I never even asked you that question. You got to leave room for that.
What a cool insight. Back to that notion of agency of the workplace today, is that we don't have one size fits all. And letting people, giving them some room, one wouldn't think that there's a lot of variability on a climbing team, but you're pointing out that there are different roles and different strengths, and skills will eventually show up.
At least for guiding Everest, I tell people all the time, 90% of your clients are CEOs of their own very high level, high functioning folks that have the discretionary income to do something like climb Everest. Imagine trying to get 10 to 12 CEOs to play nice together. So it really does boil down to attaching to that core purpose point. Like, what is that thing that brought you here? What's the thing that's going to keep you here and keep you open to what's possible?
I like to focus on the positive. My mantra these days, given to me by Matt Brubaker, is amplify light, which I love.
Not good ones. That's great.
Isn't that a good one? And apparently Rachel gave that to him. But I'm going to ask you to amplify darkness here for a second. Do you have any horror stories about, this ego thing, surrendering ego for the overall purpose, for the overall good of the team? Ever work with somebody on a mountain that didn't, or had real trouble surrendering ego?
All the time. I think it's so ingrained in who we are as human beings, right? And I think in the professional space, I ask people all the time that are sort of trying to figure out what's next, getting ready for a promotion, asking that very generic question of what are you holding on to versus what are you empowering other people to do? Are you really letting go of the things that it's going to leave room for what comes next? Climbing Everest can be both as team focused as anything else, but also one of the most selfish things you can do as well. You have to focus on a high level of fitness, a high level of technical detail. And sometimes people take that selfishness into every aspect of the climb, especially if it's in a client scenario where, well, I get we're all a team, but I paid the same as all of these folks. I'm faster than they are. So I should be able to go as fast as I want. And we should be able to go at speed and not wait for them. This idea of safety in numbers, I think, really translates to the marketplace and to business. It gets really lonely and scary out there when you're on your own. And the people that let ego get in the way, I mean, sadly, Foster, I've watched people literally walk to their death because they won't let go of the fact, no, I know you tell me it's not time to go because of weather. But my team is going to go anyway. You have to be able to surrender a little bit to really allow other people to rise around you and to allow a different part of yourself to lead. It truly is an exploration of every type of leadership style there is on the planet.
That's beautiful. That's advice for leaders. That's advice for outdoors people. That's advice for parents. That's advice for life, that you've got to be able to surrender a little bit of yourself or something, maybe that ego at times, to see what else will emerge in there. That's beautiful. Luis, one of the things, I liked many things about your book. Yeah, I would imagine a lot of your learning is kinesthetic. So that one, I wasn't quite sure what was going on in that picture.
That's what my publisher said. They said, exactly. You want people to open the book and try to figure out what it is.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, that's good then. What I liked about the book was that it is part memoir, narrative about who you are as you've grown into these positions of responsibility, and now a spokesperson for not only an industry, but a way of life in many cases, as well as description of the journey with Erik. It's fabulous. It's not quite a how-to book as much as it is opening up possibilities in the reader for what's possible for them. The subtitle here is How the Outdoor Recreation Industry Can Save the World. And I must admit, and I've told you this before, I was a bit skeptical when I first picked up the book. Boy, that's a bold claim. That is really a bold claim. I'm going to ask you what the justification is for that claim. But first, I'd love you to describe your background in the outdoor rec industry first.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I tell people all the time that I truly am a byproduct of the industry, they tend to laugh until I go through the entire sequence that I'm about to share with you. I've already talked about the Ecuadorian side of my family.
Yep.
Having a little bit of a mountaineering background. The American side of my family, my American grandfather owned a specialty retail sporting goods store that was literally a half a mile away from my grade school, the first Orvis dealership in the Midwest. So fly fishing, bird hunting, sporting goods store. So at a very early age, in the context of specialty retail and business, a business that put food on the table, was able to just walk down the street to my grandfather's store, help stock shelves, help talk to customers, help understand that whole piece. But here's really where it impacted my paradigm. I think because my grandfather's store was incredibly unique in the Midwest, in St. Louis, at a time when there was really nothing else like it. When I asked my grandfather about the origin of his shop, Kelly's Sporting Goods, he said, well, I was kind of a fly fishing and bird hunting guide along with doing some other work. Your grandma was a certified public accountant. She was a CPA. But I had a lot of clients that turned into really good friends. And they said, Bill, we're tired of ordering our shotguns from Scotland and our fly rods from Ireland. We want you to open a shop. And we're gonna seed fund you. And you never have to pay us back. But when you're solvent, if we want to come in and pull something off the shelf, you're going to eat it. You're going to let us. And you better hire a good manager, because if we want you to guide us, you better be able to have a manager that's going to take care of the shop, and your wife can run the books. And that's the way it's going to be. And I asked my grandfather, like, who were these people? And he started rattling off these champions of industry and politics, Senator Danforth, Senator Ashcroft, Augie Bush Sr. from Anheuser-Busch. These were people that I knew as uncles growing up, because my grandfather's store had a corner with leather couches and a little refrigerator in front of a fireplace that all these guys would come in after work, or if they were in town, and just hang out at the neighborhood gear store. It's like you hang out at REI now, or you hang out in other stores. But the thing I noticed later, and I reflected on this with my grandfather, I said, we had every political stripe in your shop. And the one thing they could all agree on, other than their love of the outdoors, was conservation policy, conservation and stewardship of these wild places and spaces and wilderness. And it was amazing that they could be disagreeing about everything under the sun, but when it came to those things, they were in lockstep that these things are America's best idea and they need to be protected. And so my political education, along with my business education and my physical education, truly was the arc of the narrative through my entire life. Went to school, couldn't really understand what the hell I was doing when all I wanted to do was be outside and to have a store like my grandfather's and to figure it out. But okay, I guess you need to learn all this stuff. Ended up working for the Colorado Outward Bound School in the summers here in Colorado, which you don't really just become a wilderness educator and the technical skills. It's about communication. It's about leadership. It's about doing all of those pieces while using the mountains and the rivers as a medium for that dialogue. And then I just had a really definitive moment in my life where I said, listen, you could head straight to grad school and do the thing that's somewhat expected, or you could take all these magical things and turn it into the one thing that you really want to go after. And for me, it still rang true, that National Geographic article. I wanted to find a way to get to the Himalayas. Started splitting my time between working for Outward Bound and working for guide services, both based in the United States and one in New Zealand. And slowly but surely, the resume kept building. Finally got introduced to Erik, and then summiting Everest with Erik really changed the trajectory of my life, and ended up spending a decade guiding the big mountains all over the world, mostly the 7 summits, the highest mountain on each of the 7 continents. And that really led to getting back to policy and getting back to understanding that I've been lucky enough to see and touch and work in all of these wild, remote places with communities and cultures that are indigenous to those places, and just asking the larger questions of how are these things protected, both protecting the culture, the people, the communities, and the natural resource. And just came back around in the United States to recognizing that that was still something that needed to be answered within our own community and our own country. Started going deeper into the policy arena, ended up working for our former governor, now Senator John Hickenlooper in Colorado, as the first director of the outdoor industry office, overseeing the entire industry for the state. At the time was about a $68 billion industry. So everything from skiing to hiking, biking, boating, climbing, hunting, fishing, everything you can think of in Colorado. Ended up embedding in the ski industry as well, trying to help them answer what growth and sustainability looks like in the United States. And then it came full circle, really working with brands. Because when you think about who holds the megaphone for how we do these things in the United States, when you see an advertisement for a North Face jacket, or, a Lululemon yoga pad, or a pair of trail running shoes or a mountain bike, the brands are really ones that amplify this question of what we ask of ourselves and of our government in this space in the United States. So I really have been lucky to lead a very diverse life, but my life has been in its entirety in and around this industry.
We'll be right back.
Most high performers don't need more ambition or vision. They need better support infrastructure and daily practices to hold it. Wholeness at Work offers leaders real tools for meaningful growth, lifelong impact, and sustained performance. Explore our holistic tools, insights, and practices for working in a way that actually feels like you. Visit ourwholenessatwork.com. If you could wave a magic wand today and affect national public policy in a couple of areas around the outdoors, what changes would you make, or what messages would you deliver?
Yeah, and I talk about this in the book a little bit. I think, recognizing our own power. Oftentimes when you think of industries as a startup, right, there's a great idea, you get a little bit of momentum, a little bit of funding, a couple of raises, and all of a sudden that idea has merit and traction and visibility. And I think for the outdoor industry, there was always this bifurcation of, are you conservation, where you're about saving a tree or a river or a fish or a trail, or are you the industry, which is all about capitalism, like skiing, like river guiding, or things like that? The proposition of it's all of that. It's all of it put together. And if you actually look at it that way, our political voice should be 10x what it is right now. Colorado started the outdoor industry office. At the time, there were only 4 other states with the role. Now, in 2025, Iowa just created an office. There are 25 states with offices of outdoor recreation attached to their governor's office. So when you ask me, what would we do? What's next? I truly do think a federal office of outdoor recreation industry should be what's next, to really look at these things holistically and not through their individual verticals. And sort of the theory of change that I have, Foster, is the more technically oriented we get, the more important AI is, the more all of these speed of technology increases. America has something that a lot of other places don't, and it's this. It's the ability to connect with the outdoors and understand just how important it is to who we are as human beings.
I don't want to steal from the book, but I'd love you to, for people who haven't yet read it, make the case for how the outdoor rec industry can save the world.
We're already seeing it now. I mean, the book's not that old, and it's less than a couple of years old. And I think one of the things that we're seeing right now, even the kids on Instagram, the younger generation, have this hashtag called Touch Grass.
No kidding. Wow.
So there's this realization of, yeah, sure, a gym will get your heart healthy, a gym will get your muscles strong, but there is something about fresh air and being outside that changes things. And so I think that cultural zeitgeist is starting to evolve into, this is just as important as tech. This is just as important as whatever it is, whatever industry that you're involved in. And so this idea of saving the world is really understanding that when you look at it through a balance lens and an equation, name one other industry in the world that is nonpartisan, nothing but good for you, and is not extractive in any way, and whose primary goal is to protect the natural resources that facilitate the recreation. And so I think this idea of truly saving the world is that if we can get this right and stand as a model for the rest of the planet, I think you're going to see true cultural change. Other countries have tapped on it. Bhutan has the gross happiness index instead of the GDP. People used to laugh at it, and now people are sending government agencies to Bhutan to understand what does this mean? How does it factor in? Because of what's happened in Scandinavian countries, doctors have the capacity to prescribe time outside as an actual prescription. I have a choice. In this hand is a prescription for medication. In this hand is a prescription for 2 hours a day outside in the sun, getting fresh air. Doctors have the ability to do that now, based on what Scandinavian countries have done. The Japanese call it forest bathing. So I think the capacity to save the world is rooted in mental and physical health and well-being. But I think the policy and the political voice, when you have an industry, and this is the last statistic I'll drop on you, hopefully, we're over $1.2 trillion in consumer spending, responsible for over 5 million American jobs. Now, when you look at the other trillion-dollar economies in the United States, we're bigger than the auto industry in the United States. We're just about as big as the pharmaceutical industry, if not a little bit bigger. Think about their political gravity and weight, and think about ours. So this idea of pulling together all these conversations to play at that level, we already are at that level fiscally. We are already at that level in the context of a job engine in the United States. Now we just need to behave like it.
I love the link to economic benefit as well as physical and emotional health that you make in this book about how outdoor rec industry has sustained and even rebuilt communities. Very, very powerful story. Again, highly recommended. What can we do? We're the average Joe and Jane, and we're wherever we are, and we touch grass from time to time. What can we do to support this national conversation about how important this is?
This is really the kaleidoscope of public-private partnerships. And the one thing I think our industry does better than any other one out there, you don't see nonprofits that are started to support the auto industry. You don't see nonprofits that are started necessarily to support, some of these other industries that we've talked about. For us, it is a deeply ingrained part of our ecosystem. And so when you ask, what can that average person do? First, see if your state has an office of outdoor recreation. If they do, get engaged, get in touch. They often are the hub of the wheel for a lot of this dialogue and a lot of the conversation. And two, If you don't want to get to that level and you're not interested in that, find the nonprofit that cares about what you care about. I guarantee that there is a group out there that loves your trail, your stretch of river, your park just as much as you do, and is working really hard to make sure that those resources are sustainable. Find them and support them. Be a part of their process. And I think that's the best thing you can do at a macro and micro level.
Those are really good suggestions. We'll drop some links in the show notes based upon what Luis has recommended here. Lightning round kind of questions I try and ask all our guests. Outside of family, what is the one thing in your life of which you are the most proud?
Ooh, I think outside of family, I think the thing I'm the most proud of is two things: summiting Everest with Erik and still being friends. That's a big source of pride for me. The whole team is still friends. And two is being at the start of helping to shape this national conversation that we're talking about. I'm incredibly proud of the work that we did. And Iowa literally just signed on to start an office yesterday. So 25 states in 2025 at the year of our 250th anniversary. You couldn't have planned it any better. And so incredibly proud that now has momentum and gravity and will continue.
Second question is, what's the lesson you have to learn for yourself over and over?
I just had this conversation with somebody, Foster, and I think this is important for senior leaders as well. I subscribe to I call it the Jeffersonian model of leadership. So if you haven't already figured out that I'm a political nerd, there you go. There's another drop. And what I mean by that is you do the job that you think you are best equipped to do, and then you make room for who and what comes next. I'm often asked, why did you leave the Colorado director role for the outdoor industry office? It seems like you still have a lot to say, a lot to do. And for me, there was a change in governor. The following governor asked me to stay. I did through transition. But what I said to him is what I'll share with you. You have to make room for what and who comes next. It doesn't mean that I've disconnected from the dialogue. It doesn't mean that I'm not a part of the process. I still very much enjoy being in the mix and a part of the conversation. But the person that's going to sit in the chair, it needs to be someone different. So the thinking continue to evolve and grow. You hear it all the time with founder syndrome, and you see it all the time. So that's something for me that has been an incredibly important part of my journey.
Oh, it's outstanding. That resonates personally. It's something that Matt and I have gone through, because I know that I could not have grown or developed FMG Leading to the level it is today. He was the next one. I needed to step aside, figure out what was next for me, but allow him to take FMG to a much better and higher place. And he's going through the same thing right now with our new president, Will Bush. You alluded to this earlier. If the younger you showed up and tapped you on the shoulder, what would you say to the young Luis, knowing what you now know?
Buckle up. You're going to make mistakes, and they're going to be spectacular. Life's going to be messy, but you're fully equipped for what's coming your way.
So the fourth add-on question, Luis, is what's your gear closet look like?
If I could move this thing, yeah. Have you talked to my wife? Is that what this is? Is this
but I know your friend Mark Gaston. I know what his looks like.
Oh, yeah. And I think Mark often shares he draws his inspiration from me. I mean, you have to consider I was a professional sponsored athlete for a really long time. Free stuff would show up on the front porch to test quite frequently. But I will say now, having a family, it's evolved into family gear. And so now it no longer fits. I now have to have a storage facility to put some of it. So it's a thing.
Luis, what's influencing you right now? What are you listening to? What are you reading? What are you paying attention to that keeps you filled up?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know if you're familiar with Stephen Ambrose and the book Undaunted Courage about the Lewis and Clark expedition.
One of my favorites.
I've read it a couple of times, and I've definitely it's been a while since I went back to it, And usually I'm in the middle of 4 or 5 books and constantly having to read legislation. When you ask about influence right now, that's the book that comes to the top of what I'm reading right now, just because, if you read the journals in the original versus Stephen Ambrose's version, it really gets to this idea that the map ended at St. Louis. And what came next was Indian country, and we're not quite sure how the waterways connected. But how do you put together an expedition like that? Podcast, obviously yours. I mean, come on.
Come on.
Yeah. One of the other things that as I enter different phases of my life, the Ageless Athlete is another one that's really fun. He has a lot of just incredible guests on that talk about sort of these transition into their next phases. You're a professional athlete, now you're a family man or a family woman, and how do you still make it all work? Is it supposed to all work the same way?
Wow.
That's a really fun one. And then Aspen Ideas to Go, about the Aspen Ideas Festival.
Luis, thank you. You're always so generous with your time. I appreciate it. What can we promote for you besides the book?
Yeah, you definitely, always love working with FMG. Not to get a plug in for all of you. It's been a lovely relationship, and always appreciate the partnership. Right now, helping the other states that don't have outdoor industry offices build momentum. You can learn all about that at confluenceestates.com. That's really easy to find. And other than that, like you, just trying to bring more light into the world however I can.
I want to thank our guest, Luis Benitez. There are a ton of nuggets of wisdom I took from our chat. First, how a young boy severely suffering from asthma and allergies overcame what most of us would consider debilitating physical limitations through grit, determination, hard work, and will to end up standing on top of the world, ironically, the most oxygen-starved place on the planet. Second, how his experiences continued to lead him to protect those things he most valued: wild, open spaces, and exploration, to become the first state czar of outdoor recreation in the nation. And finally, how his testimony, captured in his book, Higher Ground, is an invitation for all of us to get outdoors, get involved, and share adventure. Set the table, invite cool people, magic happens. I think you'd agree that Luis belongs at the table. Until next time, leaders, stepwise. If this conversation was worth your time, and I hope it was, do one thing for me before you close the app. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. It takes 60 seconds. It's how people like you help people like me find this show. And if what we talked about today sparks something in you, good. That's the whole point. There's a book called Leadership: Rethinking the True Path to Great Leading. Yes, that's the real title that goes deeper into this territory. It's on my website at fostermobley.com. Check it out. And then sign up for our email list to be notified when my next book, Honoring, goes into pre-sale in 2027. And if there's one person in your life who needed to hear this episode, send it to them. Not because we need the numbers, because they need the conversation. Set the table, invite cool people, magic happens. I'm Foster Mobley. As always, friends, stepwise. Our music for Season 3 is composed and performed by Montana musical legend Philip Auberg, courtesy of Sweetgrass Music. Phil's recent passing was felt by many, including those of us associated with this podcast. If you're not familiar with Phil's Grammy-nominated music, do yourself a favor and follow him on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your music. We thank Patty Auberg and Sweetgrass Music for access to this beautiful piece.
Thank you for listening to Stepwise. Stepwise is produced, edited, and promoted by Zedist with support from Amber Gillard Consulting. Find more episodes and resources at fostermobley.com and follow Foster on social media at Foster Mobley. We'll see you next time.